comes and leads us in our lesson for Bible training today, we will have a brief members meeting. The recommendation by myself, the deacons, is to move to add the following individuals to the pool of men qualified for deacon service: Taylor Jarman, Chad Johnson, Ethan Wooten, 3 men that walked with me over the last year in deacon training. And so for all of our full members, Craig, would it be helpful if they just stood up? Yes. For all of our, if you're able, all of our full members stand up, and we will make sure you get a ballot. And just wait to complete the ballot until just a moment. As you look at the ballot, the motion is presented on there, along with the phrase, choose as many as you are able to affirm. So this is, if you can reasonably, personally affirm 1, then do 1 or 2 or 3. We understand that no one person within our church family knows everything about everyone. Nobody does that, right? So this is just what you know about these men. Can you personally affirm that they are qualified for deacon service as outlined in Scripture? So, all right. When you get those, Ray, they're leaving you hanging, man.
I know. I was like, front and center with you.
That's right. I'll give you mine. Ralph, do you need one? No comment. No comment. Let me pray, thanking the Lord for these men as we consider adding them to the pool of potential nominees for deacon ministry, okay? Father, we are grateful for what you have done within our church family. It is a joy to watch you at work in the lives of people, in the lives of men, in the lives of these men. It is a joy to watch not only you work, but them receive not the grace of God in vain. Father, I pray that you would give us wisdom, even now as we consider personally, as we have watched these men, have considered them, adding them to the list of men that we together recognize as qualified for deacon ministry. Lord, guide and direct us, I pray, and guide and direct these men in the coming days. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so go ahead, full members, complete as many as the following as you're able to affirm. Then once you're done, fold it in half, and our men will collect those ballots. If you could pass them down the end of the row, that would be helpful. Thank you. That was helpful. What's that? I'll take them back. Do you have any? You gave them to him. Good. All right. Good. All right. Thank you very much. Andy, you're up, man.
Had it off, don't worry. Sorry about that. Okay. Welcome to Bible Training Hour. And this week we're going to talk about Christian liberty, individual Christian responsibility. This is going to be 2 parts. So I think I've learned, finally, I've hit this many pages, I have this many slides. Hey, let's cut it off. Or we'll get done early and we can do Q&A, but if the minute I say that, it like hexes it. It can't happen. So we definitely won't have time for any of that. Maybe it'll work now. Okay, so this week we want to talk about the next like sort of unit in the Baptist theology segment. And this week we're going to talk about individual Christian responsibility. But first we're going to have some housekeeping items. There's a couple of things that have come up that demonstrate part of the importance of church membership that we talked about last time we were together. So I'm not seeking to do any gossiping, but there is something really telling that happened, and I want to bring it up. And then the last thing I want to say is that I do think the men who have their name in for the deacon pool have run a flawless campaign. There's a flawless campaign. All right, that's all I'm sorry. Okay, so let's have some housekeeping items here. Does anyone in here know the name Stephen Lawson? Raise your hand if you do. Okay, some of you are familiar. So Stephen Lawson is a really well-known and well-reputed preacher. He ran the D-Min program at Masters Theological Seminary, where John MacArthur is. I've talked to President Tillotson. He's had classes under Steve Lawson. Well, 6 weeks ago, it was revealed that he was discovered to be in an inappropriate relationship with a 25-year-old. He's 75, and it had been going on for 5 years, from what I understand. Now, when this happened, he's so well known in Christendom that many people were saying, what are the details? What do you mean an inappropriate relationship? Is this breaking a biblical qualification? Like, what are you going to do about it, Trinity Bible Church? And the church was sort of like very quiet. Now, there's a couple of things I want to say. Like, I don't think we need to know details of other churches. I don't think we need to know that. I don't think I need to go and go to every church and ask for, hey, what disciplinary action has happened and what are the details? With this situation, it's complicated because he's such a public person in Christianity. And so at that point, I think what you could say is the more public your ministry, the more public your behavior is going to be revealed if you're walking disorderly, to use the term we just talked about. And so people were calling the church to say things. John MacArthur's right-hand man, Phil Johnson, thank you, he was sort of answering but not answering. And it's been pretty much quiet. Just this week, someone in the church finally spoke to one of these discernment websites, but it was very interesting. What was discovered, and it was there the whole time, and if you clicked on the church's bio page and said, who are our leadership, who's our staff, it would have showed Lawson's picture, the 4 pastors, and the church secretary, and under Lawson's name, it would have said lead preacher, and under all the others, it says elder of, elder of, elder of, elder of, church secretary, coordinator, something. And so you would probably see that and think, oh, he's like the head pastor? Well, I don't know. I'm confused. Lead preacher? What does that mean? It turns out he was never on staff, or he was never a member of the church. So he had 2 previous pastorates, if this information I read is accurate, and in those pastorates, the churches sort of imploded and split under his leadership, and he kind of had a bad experience. So when he came to Trinity, he said, I don't want to be a pastor. I just want to preach. And so someone they had interviewed remarked, they said, sometimes he would exhibit some odd behavior, but none of us thought much of it. And here's one example. He would show up at the very last minute and sit in the back row, and then he would walk up to preach, then he would go sit down in the back row, and the minute the service is over, he would jet out the door. Every now and then he talked to maybe a college student or two, but when people wondered about it, the line was, well, he's got to guard his time because he's traveling ministry is so wide and expansive. Now, if he's not a member, do you understand why that church cannot call him up under church discipline? So last time we were together, we talked about the point of church membership is that we're all part of the body. We're different body parts in the body. We all function differently. But then, how do you see the membership idea? That's sort of fallen out of favor in our culture today. Part of it is that the nature of disciplining a person out of the body functionally requires that at one point they were officially in the body. And so I'm not bringing this up to gossip. I'm just bringing this up because I think this actually helps us to say, here's a real life example where a church squished on this rule. And if you go to their website, they have a very thorough statement on church membership. So I actually think, in my opinion, those elders bear some heavy responsibility here for allowing a guy to be like an itinerant preacher full time and people to think he's like a pastor. I'm outside. That's their church. I can't one another those people. Okay, so that's not my local church. At the same time, I think that can instruct us. Membership is a very important thing. All right, secondly, I think I have a note there. This is Gilson in the local church, and I have a quote for you. I read a book by Rachel Gilson called Born Again This Way. It's like an argument against Lady Gaga's song Born This Way, which is all about the homosexual lifestyle. I know, it's true. She's a former lesbian and agnostic who then gets saved and deals with her same-sex attractions. And she's like, what do I do with this? How do I handle this? I think the book is largely a decent book. I'm not totally sure about SSA and how to speak about it. In her last chapter, though, she does say, some Christians who struggle in these ways label themselves as gay Christians. And she doesn't like that label because gay is like a sin and it's outside of God's design, and it's like you're taking that as the way you identify yourself, it's the way you view yourself. So she says the SSA, same-sex attraction, label has its own problems, but what she likes about it is she's not identifying herself, she's describing her experience of temptation. So I'm not necessarily recommending the book. I think it had some really good points to it. I think she wrote it so you could hand it to someone who walks this struggle and it would be like not as offensive. But in it, she was talking about the value of the local church. And remember last time we were together, I'd said the way I sort of distinguish between the local and the universal church is my local church, I can carry out the one another commands. I can't do that to someone in the church in China, and I can't do that to Martin Luther. Both of those are in the universal church, but they're not in my local church. The next day I'm reading this, and she says this, this is such a good quote. She said, the Bible is filled with one another's, ways in which our faith is to be exercised with humans who are actually close enough to rebuke us, close enough to hold us when we cry, close enough to buy us the too expensive gift for our birthday, and vice versa. We need to be close enough to offend and yet be forgiven, to be annoyed and yet persevere in love. How painful that many singles have attempted this in the body and have been rebuffed. If we married people will not seek friendship and family with singles, don't we bear some responsibility when those siblings retreat into isolation or bitterness? And she was commenting on her single season and like, what do I do in a church? But I really liked it because I think that's what functionally the local church is supposed to do. We're supposed to become a family and we're supposed to do the one another's to each other. Okay, so none of that's this week. I just couldn't not say something about those related to our last week's topic. Okay, so where are we going next? The Bowder Plan. Okay, so we're going to follow Bowder's next unit, and I think it's and I want to show you, this is that grid of all the different ways I've found that you can arrange the different theological teachings of the Baptists. So if you look in the Baptist acrostic, for some of you, if that's what you memorize and it's like internalized to you, Bowder simply combines the priesthood of the believer and the teaching of individual soul liberty into one topic, individual Christian responsibility. And I really like that. I remember in class in Baptist history, I went to go teach individual soul liberty, and there's not as much on both of those, but they really do fit nicely together. So we're more going to hit the individual soul liberty than the priesthood of the believer. We will talk a little bit about that. Okay, so we'll use his, and then to get us started, I want to ask this question. How can we make people believe the gospel? How can you make someone believe the gospel? Think about that for a minute. How can you make them want to be a part of our local church? What are the ways you could do that? So I have this church growth idea. Here's a new church growth movement created by Andy Stearns. Now, I'm going to call it the Altoona Inquisition. So any of you remember the Spanish Inquisition? You never expect the Spanish Inquisition. So what we're going to do, hold on, let me actually make this more true to form. There we go. So we're gonna go door to door. Nate is suggesting that he needs to pre-screen my slides next week. That's probably not a bad idea, actually. All right, so let's consider this. What if all of us, we were like, hey, we're going to, you know how you used to go out and like canvass the neighborhood and like, hey, we're having a big kids event or a big church event or a big picnic event. Or what if we like canvass the neighborhood and we like bust down doors and we go inside and we're like, are you guys sinning? Oh, you're sinning? You don't believe the gospel? Boom, and we whip out our pillows or, I can't remember how in that sketch they're like, what's the real Spanish Inquisition in history? It essentially was something like that. You're inspecting people's lives, and if they're not believing, you're going to punish them until they believe. And so today's issue or topic that's going to spread over the next 2 weeks is the idea of how do you compel people, or should you compel people to believe? And that's going to directly affect who's in the church. So can I just say everyone in Pleasant Hill is automatically a member of Anchor Baptist? And then can I go to their house and be like, hey, you have not been showing up. We're putting you under church discipline. Is that the right way to do that? If you're like, that's weird, that's just state church model Germany pre-Reformation and actually even today. You're in a location, you're part of the church. What if I said anyone who's born into a family that's already part of the church is automatically a member, and then I'm going to watch them, and if they don't obey, I'm going to pull them up on discipline. Well, that's functionally today Catholic, Presbyterian, and Lutheran. If you're born, we sprinkle you, you're part of the church. Did you have any say? Did that actually affect you? What about the idea of punishing someone? If I punish you, is that actually going to cultivate belief? It does something, but I'm going to make the case that it doesn't actually cultivate true belief. It only affects external behavior. Now, because of these elements, that's what, when we look at the Bible, which more of that's going to happen next week. So this is going to be a little Bible light today. We're going to talk more concepts. Because of the nature of these things, if I'm trying to get someone to believe, air quote, I have to be careful how I go about that. And what the application is going to be primarily for our church. How do you become a member? Why do we have certain members this way? And why do we do things the way we do? But the application of this actually is going to go, I'm going to say it's going to go all the way to parenting and all the way to relationships. There's going to be actual relational and parenting applications. And most people understand this, but when you walk it back, sometimes church denominations don't understand this back here. So let's go ahead and carry on. And isn't that glorious? Okay, let's move on. All right, let's talk about the idea of, I'm not going to ever get asked to teach Sunday school again. I already know that, but I guess if I'm going out with a bang. Okay, let's talk about the idea of responsibility. Okay, responsibility. Let's define and describe responsibility. All right, first of all, what's the definition of responsible? If you look it up in a dictionary, and I know what you're saying, which dictionary? Trust me, this is just the generic Oxford or Merriam-Webster's or whatever, but they all say something very close to the same thing. Responsible means this: it is the state or the fact of being accountable to or to blame for something. So if you have an area where you're accountable for something, you could then by extension say, that's my area of responsibility. So for me, I am accountable at Faith for teaching certain classes. If I don't go and teach those classes, I have abandoned my responsibility and I probably won't get a contract for the following year. It's probably the same for you at your job. You have responsibilities. You have big responsibilities, and you have miniature responsibilities too. So today, I teach Sunday school. I was 7 minutes late to church or 5 minutes late to church this morning. It was really bad. What if I'd been 10 minutes late right now? Well, we had that members meeting, so I would have been okay. But the fact that I'm late, I'm actually, you see what I'm doing? I'm not fulfilling my responsibility by being late. So little things relate to our responsibilities. All right. What does accountability mean? All right, so the word accountable means you have a requirement or an expectation to justify your actions or decisions, and then a synonym is responsible. What I like about the word accountable is the idea, if I know I have accountability, when I say that, it's a little more clear to me that there's going to be some sort of assessing of my carrying out of my responsibility. If I am not ever assessed or judged, then functionally, I would say de facto, I'm not actually in a position where I have to have responsibility. So oddly, you were talking about rules that are not enforced consistently. If a rule is not enforced, I have that responsibility, but I'm never being held to account, so I can be irresponsible, and there's no problem with that. Okay, what are some implications and conclusions? All right, first of all, if I have a responsibility, that means there's some sort of requirement or expectation that I also have. If you say, Andy, you are responsible to teach Sunday school today, there's an expectation that I ahead of time plan, ahead of time do research, ahead of time think about communication, and then create everything, send everything to everyone. I have responsibility to do that. and I could be judged for that. So there are requirements when you have responsibilities. Oh, I pushed it too hard and broke it. Oh, man. Oh, that went all the way to the end. Well, now that took that joke out of the way. Oh, hey, we're back again. So this thing has a responsibility to work. Are we gonna? We should hold it accountable. Okay, implications and conclusions. All right, number one. Okay, I think I figured out the push. There's some type of a requirement on us. If you have a responsibility, there are requirements on your life. Now we know this at work, but have we thought about it at church? Literally, we're talking about some of these things today. Secondly, if you have a responsibility, you logically expect that there's a judgment you are accountable to. By holding this requirement, I also expect that I'll be assessed or judged in regards to the success at holding out or carrying out this responsibility. And then thirdly, the idea of responsibility requires some level of freedom on our part. Now, I don't want to get into the Calvinism and Arminianism, the sovereignty and the free will discussion. I'm not trying to go there. Even if you are totally on the sovereignty side, you have to recognize that if God gives a command, I'm expected to make a choice to obey. Whatever you want to call that. If you don't want to call it free will, that's fine. You want to call it whatever you want to call it. I don't care. But I have to choose, and if I don't choose, I'm being judged for my personal free choice. Maybe my will is bound by sin. Okay, I'm going to recognize that. But my choices are expected in freedom to align with God's. Okay? I could require an ant to build me an airplane. Okay? And then when that ant fails, I could angrily judge that ant. What are most of you thinking at this point, other than I'm messed up and cracked in the head? Like, you can't expect that out of an ant. The ant has no capacity to do that. It has no capacity to even understand what I'm saying. The ant doesn't really have, in any sense, freedom. I can only require something of someone who is able, at some level, to make that choice. So, most people would see this and think there's some level of inability. Now, consider kings and governors throughout history. Anytime you have, like, think about the French Revolution. You have the leadership in France putting a crushing, I'm talking crushing tax burden on the peasantry in the provinces. They had a salt tax where every year people were required to buy 7 pounds of salt from the French government. How much salt do you go through? Like, I'm like one of those iodized salt containers, maybe. If I'm like doing a lot of barbecue, I don't know, maybe 2. I don't know, like maybe 3. 7 pounds. Now, these are poor people. They've got no money. And there's some lord somewhere who owned the salt production, and so they got a law codified, and you have to do this. Well, then they have to buy 7 pounds. How much do they have left over from the last year? Like 6 pounds. And they still have to buy 7 more. Guess who gets to set the prices? The government. And it's way more than they can afford. So in that situation, you have people who you're holding to responsibility. You're holding them to account to do something they literally can't do, or it's actually really, really terrible if they did do it. How did that go in France? It was positively revolutionary. Okay? Heads rolled. It was really bad. My point is, humans get this, even if you don't want to agree with me. Like, even if you're like, oh, we're robots and God's sovereignty and we're all robots. The way you functionally live your life is like this. If the governor of the state of Iowa started putting a salt tax on us, we would rise up, okay? So there is some level of freedom out there that everyone recognizes. I'm just simply saying, let's apply that here. Okay, so now, here's my question. If you have this idea of accountability and responsibility, and it does require freedom on the part of the person, how do you get those people to carry out those responsibilities? And that's really where we want to land for our main part of our discussion. How do I get people to obey? Now, where I'm going to go is obeying the gospel, but we're not going to get there till next week. Like voluntarily obeying the church, we'll get there next week. But this week, I just want to talk about obedience. What are my options? Well, first of all, I have force. Now, I'm not talking about using the force or anything like that, okay? I'm saying force, like you can use it. So could I force people to carry out their responsibilities? Sure. Do we ever do this in our culture today? Yeah, where do we do it? Someone like say something loud. What's that? Speeding, literally my illustration. I'm going to give you 2 emojis. Good job. Whichever ones you want. Well, and there's one, you can't have the chocolate chip one, okay? I don't let anyone get that one. I can only say that here. That's glorious. But whatever, okay, good job. Speeding tickets. So if you go over the speed limit, you will get a ticket. So I was driving in Minneapolis. I was rushing to Central for a class. I was running late. This has never happened to me ever in my life. And I was in the cities, and have you ever driven in Minneapolis? There's like 5 lanes, and you're just going the speed. You're just going whatever speed everyone's going. But in the like 5 lanes, I was on the one nearest to the edge, and there was like, bumper to bumper cars in these 3 lanes. There's like kind of spaced out cars, and there's like 1, 2, there's space over here. And I was over here going 17 over. I can't remember what it was, and I'm in this big white truck with an 8-foot bed, pickup. And I go under this bridge, and you know how there's like those sides that go up? No kidding, cop car right there. And so I got pulled over, and I got a ticket. It was $175. And the guy even said this. Now, this is interesting. He's like, now, just in case you think, I'm not going to pay this, I'll just never come back to Minneapolis. We have a reciprocity agreement with the state of Iowa, so if they ever catch you in Iowa, you're going to have to pay them and us, and so it's in your best interest to pay this. So they're heavily fining me to make me follow the speed limit. Okay, what did I do after I got that ticket? I was like a grandpa. No offense to grandpas. I was like, well, like sometimes, here goes this Corvette down the road at like 29 and a 30, and you're like, what's going on here? Oh, he's over. Anyways. When words are many. When words are many. Okay, so a law, what is the point of the law? Like when I got that speeding ticket, my internal beliefs about the speed limit did not change 1 iota. My beliefs about how much I wanted to risk speeding did, right? But internally, I don't think I had any change in thinking I was like, this is bad, I shouldn't speed, okay? I think it's bad, I don't want to get caught, I don't want to pay that much money again, I want to tell my wife that, like, this would be bad, like, I don't want that to happen again, okay? But I actually don't think my mind changed about my speeding habits. So then, what's the purpose of the law if I don't change my beliefs? Here's a really good thing for you to think about. Laws require obedience, that's carrying out a responsibility. It's requiring you to be responsible, but to the codes of conduct of our society, but it doesn't actually change anything about your internal belief system. So a law is really good at requiring obedience, and I would say it's really bad or only once in a while successful at changing your actual beliefs about the thing. So if you go out and murder someone, you might regret it, but you're probably just more scared that you're going to get put away for life in prison. Now, what does change your thought about murdering? So I'll give you another example that's not murder. A guy at one of my former churches, he was in Cleveland. Yeah, Cleveland, that's in Ohio. He's walking down the street. He's like a biochem doctoral student, and so, no offense, like super nerdy and like a wimp. And he's walking down the street, and he looks down this alley, and there's this not dressed well woman getting beat up by this very like fuzzily dressed man, okay? It's like a hooker and a pimp, okay? And he didn't know what was going on, and so he went to go help the one who's getting beat up, and the guy turned, and he's like, you want some? And he like literally beat the tar out of this guy I know, like totally bloodied, had to go to the hospital, broken bones all over. Now, he's not a believer. He'd grown up in a wonky legalistic church, walked away from all of it. He was like kind of pursuing all these different religious aspects, and he decided, I'm never going to let that happen to me again. So he started working out, and he took kendo. Kendo is, if I'm understanding correctly, it's like a martial art that's like uses a sword. And so he got really good at this martial art. He was really good with the sword. He would go out to a tree, and he would hang like this from the tree. As long as he could, he got to where he could hang for like 5 minutes to build up arm strength, okay? And I thought, really, 5 minutes? Like, 5 seconds, and I'm like, No kidding, 3 years later, walking down the same street, encounters the same guy beating up the same type of lady, And he walks down, he's like, hey, you remember me? And proceeds to beat the living tar out of this guy. So at one point, he's on top of him, and he's just hitting him in the face, and hitting him in the face, and hitting him in the face. And then as he winds back one time, he looks in his eyes, and he realizes, I have become him. And he's like, he had to stop. Now, in between now and then, he had done ride-alongs with the police department, and so he's really good friends with the police. So he called a buddy who's a policeman, picks up the guy and him, takes him to the hospital, drops it off, and he never gets in trouble for it because of his police connections. What changed his mind in that moment? It most certainly was not the law. Maybe the law got his attention. I don't know. What changed his mind was something else internal to him that God has built into us that goes dormant. It'd be the conscience, okay? And so laws, I don't think they change the conscience or your internal beliefs. What do? They actually reveal what's in there. So like when you go past the speed limit, it reveals that you're a lawbreaker, okay? It can reveal those things, but I don't think it can actually change you. Does this fit really nicely with the way the Bible thinks about the Old Testament law? It's going to reveal what you are, but no one ever got sanctified by getting you externally change, but you internally may or may not change. And if you change internally, I believe it's because of the conscience or something else that God's doing. I don't believe it's because of the law. Man, are we on topic? Is this anything to do with church? Trust me, it does. Trust me, it does. So what's the other way you can persuade? What's the other way you can get people to change? Persuasion. Persuasion. So if it's persuasion, what am I doing there? Well, I'm reasoning with you. I'm appealing to your thoughts. I'm appealing to ideas. Maybe I'm appealing to your emotion. I'm doing something where I'm dealing with what's inside of you, what you believe, what you think, why things, like you use the why question a lot. If I'm trying to persuade you or appeal to you, then I'm actually working with what's inside you, not what's just your external behavior. So this is why when it comes to parenting, you do administer the rod, you do administer consequences. Those things do teach lessons, and we can't not do those things. But ultimately, there has to be an addressing of the heart of the issue. Otherwise, we're just going to get external conformity, but not necessarily internal change. Now, if this is true, if what I'm saying is reasonable, and if it does apply to the Bible, do you see where this is going to connect to how a person gets into the church? If I use force to make you go to a church, you may not actually believe what's in the church, right? You're just here because if I don't go here, Germany's making me pay a tax, the Spanish Inquisition's gonna hit me with pillows, whatever. But if you actually believe this is what God wants, then you voluntarily align yourself with a local assembly and you voluntarily submit to the order of the local church and the leadership of the pastors. So in church history, there are churches that would use the force option primarily, and part of the Protestant Reformation, which didn't go really far enough, but the Baptists they had this thought. If I have responsibility, I have to voluntarily believe that. You can punish people, but you can't punish people into the kingdom. You can't force someone to believe. So why would we put people in jail if they're not believers? This is sort of how this line of reasoning goes. So think about it like this. Let's apply this to the term coercion, which is simply force, just used under sort of your own sort of persuasion. So I look it up, and coercion is the practice of persuading someone to do something by using force or threats. Now, we all recognize, I think in principle, why this doesn't work. But functionally, do you ever do this? Now, this is where it got super convicting for me. I can't force a person to believe something. I can force them to do something. So coercion would work, I would say, at the level primarily of behavior, but I don't think it's going to crack the internal belief structure. Consider if you are unkind to your spouse. So let's see here. Who do I want to pick on? Oh, Stallcup, because he's on the Inquisition. Okay, so I don't know if you know this, but they are very good at making tasty, fruity drinks in their home. And so one day he's supposed to change the batch, and he forgets to. and something happens and all of their fruity drink is gone down the toilet. They got to get rid of it. And so Katie, being the very reasonable wife that she is, decides she's not going to talk to her husband for 3 days, okay? And Jason's like, yeah, I totally deserve this. Now, I know Katie would never, ever do that. But if she did, why would Jason be inclined to never forget to change the kombucha again? Not actually because he thinks he did something wrong. Well, maybe, but not because of her behavior. It would be because he doesn't want her to treat her that way. Now, what you need to know is that this has happened 100 times from Jason. You know, Katie didn't get the puppies cleaned up fast enough. And Jason's like, I'm not going to talk to you for a week. And so do you see how, like, if that was their marriage, and that's not your marriage, I'm just messing with you. Oh, you're sweating. I'll also have a meeting with the deacons today. And, but you understand, like, in a marriage, if you did that, or a relationship where you give your spouse the cold shoulder, that's actually counterproductive. You are using relational force to manipulate them to not do what you don't want them to do. That's one thing when it's a sin issue. That's a whole nother thing when it's just your preference. Now, do you understand how that's going to erode your relationship? I understand there's those truisms like happy wife, happy life. Or what can we say for a man? Happy man, happy month. Or a happy gentleman, happy January. I don't know. The teens normally right here, maybe you guys want to creatively workshop that one. What do we say for the guys? But when you say something like that, you're functionally saying, I'm going to appease them so that my life can go better. But you understand that's only at the behavior level? Like, you're not actually getting into the heart issue. You're not actually persuading. You're not actually sacrificing in love for the other person. Like, this cuts you off from a lot of the biblical one another's, a lot of them. Now, that doesn't mean we don't use the rod. The Bible says you use the rod on children. Why do we do that? Well, there's a whole bunch of training, but I do think part of it is that the child needs to know that when you do something out of God's conception of the reality of the world, something bad is going to happen. And with a little kid, that's good because they can't reason yet. They're little kids. They use cause and effect. That's it. Now, if I don't do that, if I let that kid go, and I never give the cause and effect when it's needed and when it's time, here you are as an adult, and you get really mad, and instead of slapping your sister, you shoot your coworker, and now you're up for murder charges, and there's no way to get out of that one. And so my point here is that I'm not saying you can never use like I think the rod would be a type of force, but I think the Bible's conception of it is at the proper time in the proper way with the proper motivation. We're not doing it out of anger or rage or anything like that. So this whole idea of force and whatnot, if I force someone to believe, they're not actually going to believe. They're just going to submit so they don't get negative consequences. And that's a lesson to learn in life. It is, but that's not addressing the heart. And so a Baptist church would never let someone come into the membership or force someone into the membership. And this is not a flex, but if you look at the Catholic Church, there's all kinds of persecution of non-Catholic denominations throughout church history. If you look at the Protestants, it's the same. They did a lot of persecuting. They actually teamed up with the Catholics to persecute some of the separatists. But when you look at the Baptist, you don't see that anywhere in church history. Why? This is a fundamental aspect of Baptist theology that you've got to voluntarily believe and follow the Lord, and I can't make you do that. But if you voluntarily believe this is how we're going to order our church and this is how we're going to follow the Lord together. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and wrap this up. Oh, I think I'm maybe making on time. Look at that. Now, next week we're going to talk about the word Christian. So what kind of responsibility? We have Christian responsibility. And then what kind of Christian responsibility? We actually have individual Christian responsibility, and that's where we'll have more of our theology built. But at this point, we just want to lay the foundation for responsibility. So how does force function in your own relationship? So this was a really challenging issue for me. I don't think it's wrong to have law-like elements in your home with your children. I think it's good. Like this is, again, as an adult, this was good. I was in my THM, Kevin Bowder, mustache man himself, and I didn't get a book read one time. And I went up to him and was like, hey, I didn't get the reading done today. And he just looked at me and said, you have to do the best you can then. And there's no mercy, no grace. I was scared to death. And guess what never happened again? I got all my reading done. So sometimes being merciful is actually not a mercy, okay? You need to help. But just me having the negative consequences doesn't mean my heart's going to change about that one. That just means I'm going to feel the effect, and I might learn to do my responsibilities. But there's more than that. So I would say it's not heart change, but for me, this is how this affected me as a parent, okay? So how do I reinforce reality for my children, like the way God designed the world? You do this, you apply the rod. But what I noticed is that with my son, I was threatening him a lot. Like, if you do that, this is coming. Now, can you say that? Son, you're on this path. If you persist, this is what's going to happen to you, okay? That's one thing. But it's a different thing to say, if you do that, I'm going to do. You hear the threat in that? So what am I doing? Why am I raising my voice? Why am I talking with a deeper voice? Why am I getting forceful? Because I'm trying to coerce him into obedience. Now, you do the same thing. Hey, son, if this happens, this is what the result is going to be. Are you going to go down that path? Same outcome, different heart and different use of force. And what I realize is I think I'm like coercing him. I'm forcing him. Well, that was all well and good until I read this verse, which I think I have functionally lost. Oh, it's coming up next. What does the Bible say about threats? Ephesians 6:9. Masters, do the same to them and stop your threatening, knowing that he was both their master and yours is in heaven, and that there's no partiality with him. So God tells masters of slaves who are Christians, don't threaten your slaves. Stop that. Now, here I am, a parent with a child whom I love. How much more important is for me not to be coercing and threatening my child? And so that was super embarrassing and rebuking and humbling to me. Because what was I doing? I was actually not addressing the heart. I was just using force. So now I'm trying to talk, well, what's the Bible talk about? It talks about fruit. It talks about roots and fruits. There's lots of ways I can address this. This is part and parcel, however, when it comes to how you function in a church. If you're in a Roman Catholic church and you're in Germany and you're in a certain district, you're part of that church whether you want to be or not. And then if you don't meet those responsibilities, even if you don't agree with them, church is coming after you. That doesn't encourage belief. It might, but it will be because God's using the conscience. Okay. Next week we'll talk about the Christian part of it. Next week we'll talk about the individual part. But this week I just wanted to lay out the foundation of responsibility. Okay. Now we have 3 minutes. This is the first time this has ever happened. Do you have any questions? I bet I can get one question answered, maybe. No questions? Hey, no, we can do that. We can do that. Okay. Oh, you got one. Oh, student? Okay, go ahead.
Does threats include holding this at grade point?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. So I always jokingly tell my students I hold them at grade point to get them to do their homework. I threaten you because I'm a teacher, and you have to externally conform to my grades. If we just didn't have to have grades, I wouldn't have to hold you at grade point. So it's that best Q&A ever. All right, no questions? All right, have a wonderful day. We will see you next week. Hey, there we go. Sure.